Welcome to the first ever podcast of UXRx by Create Ape. I'm one of the hosts, Zachary Newton, alongside the other host here, Alessandro. This is the first podcast that we're ever actually doing, and I think it comes at a very interesting time, right after the big pivot that we've made at Create Ape, which we're going to be talking a bit about today. But before we kind of hop into that, I mean, I know you know me. I think the majority of people listening to this don't really know who we are. They probably don't know who Create Ape is. So Al, why don't you give us a little intro about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Zach. As Zach said, I'm Alessandro Fard. Everyone calls me Al for short. I've been in the tech space for, about 23, 24 years now. With a lot of different companies in that time. A lot of them startups, a lot of established companies like Zynga, Facebook, TrueCar, Lynda.com. I've had a pretty fun career. Was doing consulting in 2014. That kind of grew into 2016, doing Create Ape, launching that full service UX and development agency, and bringing us full circle to now on the pivot towards medtech and medical.
Awesome, thanks. And again, like I mentioned, I'm Zachary. I'm a UX UI designer, developer at Create Ape. I'm the director of design, but I've been in agencies. Honestly, I think my entire life. I've just kind of gone from agency to agency. So I've worked a lot in healthcare, worked a lot with some other companies around like fintech and things like that. But yeah, it's a little bit about who I am. So. Why don't we kind of hop into who Create Ape is, right? Like I think that's the big ape in the room, really.
I think you can't really introduce Create Ape without first discussing why the name Create Ape. And like I get asked that a lot. So I would love to sit here and say that there's like this really amazing like story, but the reality is I thought it was a cool name when I was working at Lynda.com in 2011. And I thought, I might be able to use that one day. And in 2016, when my financial guy was like, dude, you need to stop doing consulting. You got to actually make a company now because you're getting killed on taxes. I was like, oh, I've got this domain. It's Create Ape. We can totally use that. And that was it. And now we stuck with it. And I think the cool thing has been that it's been fun. It's been a fun brand. Like it almost like is one of those things that you accidentally stumble upon. And it's like, oh, that's a pretty cool idea. So I think first and foremost, we'll just talk about that.
I like it.
Yeah, like it's. I mean, you tell me, Zach. You worked here for a while. Like, what do you think about when you tell people, like, where do you work? I mean, you think of Create Ape.
I mean, it takes a minute for somebody to understand what I'm saying. I'm like, oh, okay, but it sticks with them, and I think that's the thing. Like, it's a pretty memorable name, but it is interesting. I've always kind of wondered, where the name came from, but now I'm just wondering what you were watching when you decided to look up the name Create Ape.
I wasn't even watching anything. I remember I was in Ventura at the time. I was commuting to Carpinteria every day working at Lynda. And I remember I must have been home and I was using one of those domain finder thingies. And like, it was one of the suggestions. And I was like, Create Ape. I was like, that sounds cool. And I didn't use it for years. Like I just kind of just sat there and I was like, one day, so.
It does have a fun personality to it though. It definitely kind of comes through.
Yeah. Quick segue, funny story. When I first got out of college, I made an agency, quote unquote. It was called juniperdesigns.net. And I thought I wasn't even out of college, honestly. I remember actually being in it and I was like, oh, I'm going to make this thing. It's going to be super cool. And, I remember the .net really bugged me. I was like, man, why can't I get .com? And it was some lady selling tiles. That's who had the .com. And so from that point on, I was like, I'm always going to go for a .com. So it's a weird thing. That's another podcast though, to tell you about what actually happened with that whole thing when I was like in my 20s.
Juniper Design. All right. I'm going to note that one down. Yeah. So, I mean, tell me a little bit about some of the early days at Create Ape. I wasn't here from the very beginning, but I'm kind of curious to see how you grew the company.
Yeah. It's interesting. I had been around 2014, TrueCar had a pretty good IPO. I had some stock there. I was one of the early people there at Zag.com before it became TrueCar. And when I was able to leverage that stock, I was able to have a little bit of breathing room to go, hey, what do I want to do? And I started just deciding, I'm going to do consulting. And that started to grow to the point where I was like, I can't do everything. So I started working with contractors, and that continued to grow. And eventually it grew to the point where we had like 5 or 6 people here working full time, both onshore and offshore. And that's where I got to the point where I was like, okay, we need to move this into a company and create it. But the interesting thing is that I was doing everything through my personal webpage, alessandrofar.com. And because it was more for legal reasons, createape.com was more of like an afterthought. And if you ever look at the original designs, they look like they were an afterthought. They were just like, just throw something up there, doesn't matter. And it's funny, actually. Yeah, like looking at all of the different redesigns, iterations, like the shoemaker's kids doesn't have shoes. Like we're like supposed to be this like amazing like UX UI company, and we do great work for our clients, but our site has always been like, womp womp. So yeah, that started the early days, and then as the name started to take up more focus, and there wasn't so much, it wasn't centered on me anymore, but it was actually on the company itself. The early days was a lot of excitement and growth until we got to about 10 full-time people. And then it wasn't exciting any. Then it was.
What changed?
What I tell people, I've actually done a couple of interviews on this in the past, and one of the things I get to ask this question, so I've had a lot of time to think through it. And I think that the thing is that when you're under 10 people, you can fake a lot of things. You can kind of get away with a lot of things. You don't really need an HR or any of those things. It's like, okay, we're using QuickBooks, or we're using Gusto, or it's whatever. But once you get to the point where you have more than 10, you can't do everything anymore. So now you have to make sure that you have the right people in place to manage other people, and it becomes much more of a challenge. I think that going from me to 10 people, in comparison to going from 10 to 20, 10 to 20 was the hardest thing I ever did. Period. Like going from as we started to really grow just before pre-COVID, and then during the COVID days where we got to almost 60 people, like that was easy. Like it was getting to 20 that was hard. It was really, really difficult. It was running into, issues. I remember having to change our financial, our finance tool twice, because the accountant was like, oh, you can't use, Gusto, you have to use QuickBooks. I'm like, okay, fine, we'll use QuickBooks. And the other accountant's like, no, you can't use QuickBooks, you have to use this. I'm like, well, what do you want me to do, man? Like, I'm a designer. I'm not a financial guy. So yeah, it was challenging in those early times, but I think that our commitment to one key tenet was really what helped us grow. And that was, making sure that our clients got the best user experience design that we can give them, and really live and breathe the adage that, their success is our success. That's really how we grew at that time.
Yeah. I mean, the growing pains are real though, company wide, but I've also seen it like in teams and departments, right? Like when you're a smaller, more tight knit team, process kind of takes a back seat, so you can be a lot more flexible with things. But once you hit a certain threshold, I feel like it's a little different for every department or every team, but once you hit that threshold, man, if you don't have processes in place, like things really do feel like they fall apart. Like how many times did I say this week? Like 5? Let me write that down. That's the most frustrating thing to me.
Yeah. I mean, it's it's kind of, I think that's kind of where, our kind of like core principles kind of grew from, right? Like those 3, transparency, being set up for success, and accountability, right? Like that was it, because we kept going through those same things. It was like, well, I thought I talked about this already, and I think it brings up another point too, which is, how does someone who was not trained formally to be a manager or anything like that inherently have to manage, right? Like, and that was one of the things that I knew in a lot of the companies I worked with prior to this, where I would have a manager, or my team would have a manager, and I'm like, man, that person really should not be a manager. Like, I'm sure they're very good at what they do, but managing people doesn't, one of them,
Well, what was wasn't it Steve Jobs that ended up saying the best managers are the people that don't want to be managers, but decide that there's no other option?
Yeah.
Something along those lines. I found that to be true as well. It's people who understand the craft and the art of, what you're doing, that tend to be able to help guide everybody else through that process, which is pretty nice.
100%.
you mentioned COVID a little bit ago. What was Create Ape like in the COVID era? Because for those who don't know, I think I actually joined mid COVID, if I recall correctly. Yeah.
So this it was a funny story. So I remember it was 2019. It was late December, and I was playing some Steam games. I was just playing, and I was alt tabbing into Reddit, and
Mm.
I saw this. I don't remember where I even saw it from, but it was like a mysterious virus in China. And I was looking, I was like, and I've always been kind of like an amateur, like prepper, survivalist kind of thing. And I was like,
Yeah, you played the game Last of Us. Yeah.
right, exactly. Like I also played Plague Inc., so this wasn't good. I was actually just playing it at the time. And so I'm like, okay, what is that? And so I started looking at it, and I remember going in, I read up all on it. And then I remember going to my wife, and I was like, hey, this is going to be a thing. And she was like, really? I was like, yeah, this is going to be a thing, and we need to start getting ready for it. And so internally as a family, I was prepping for what eventually happened like months before we even shut down. But then as I started to see what was happening in January, I remember sitting down with the entire company, and I remember saying to them, hey guys, this is going to happen, I think. And now more than ever before, we need to really focus on our existing clients and making sure we do the best job we can, because we don't know how volatile things might get. And I was actually worried more about, economically things becoming really difficult. I was in no way prepared for the amount of growth that happened during the COVID years. I wasn't prepared for it because, because everybody was home, the demand for digital skyrocketed. The government was, just injecting money into the economy. Money was just very cheap. And, everybody had a startup. Everybody became a UX designer. Everybody was doing this stuff. And so it's really small wonder that at the height of COVID, we grew to, 60 plus people, a really big, robust leadership team, having a lot of more. I think that's where we really started to have to grow up, during those COVID years.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot that happened in the later years there. I mean, I also kind of just find it generally surprising, like how much we scaled up, right? Because yeah, there's a lot more companies focusing on digital products and tools like that because everybody's staying at home. But there was also, like you said, there were so many people that actually started to get into the industry. They were trying to become UX designers, UI designers,
Yep.
because they're sitting at home all the time on their computer. I actually had I don't know, like 4 or 5 friends of mine at the time, right when COVID kind of hit, and they're like, what should I do? Because I can't go work out of I don't know, the pizza shop or, wherever. I'm like, I mean, you could try to learn some UX, you could try to pick up some things around, development, but I mean, you're going to have to spend a little time doing that. Like I wouldn't expect to just hop on the computer and, get the job you want right away. But a lot of people were really seriously looking into things like that. So
Well, I mean,
it was a very interesting time.
I find it interesting from your perspective too, because when you came here, you were having to build out the UX team much larger than it was when you got here.
Oh, yeah.
How did it feel every time you put a thing out? You had like 300 applications like the next day.
I think the biggest thing that surprised me is probably two things. It's how often I felt like I needed to hire somebody, bring somebody on board. I had not experienced that before. I mean, I've managed decent sized design teams and development teams in the past, but the size was relatively stagnant. It didn't change much unless we had to let somebody go or ended up getting a really big project that we had to facilitate. So it was interesting to constantly see this growth. I'm starting to second guess myself. I'm like, do we really need another person already?
Cal.
And then yeah, you put out some feelers for filling that position, and it's just the next day you're swamped. I ended up posting something on LinkedIn once, and within an hour I had 72 people, and I don't have a lot of people following me or anything like that, but 72 people submitting applications. I'm like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
So that became a big time suck, for me. But
Yeah.
I think in the end, I would say it was fun. It was kind of fun to actually grow the team and see that many people working together.
Yeah.
It's difficult. Sometimes you feel like that. I don't know. I always picture that Spider-Man when he's kind of holding the train on the tracks. Everything's moving so fast. That's the kind of image that just pops into my mind.
I think in a lot of ways, COVID was a genesis though, because yes, COVID allowed us to grow astronomically fast, but I think that in a lot of ways it showed us who we wanted to be and who we didn't want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is, obviously, post COVID, the demand for digital went down. I think the huge pullback in the tech industry from a hiring standpoint, which I think we're just maybe starting to get out of a little bit, started to hit everyone. I knew people that had agencies that went, under like in a month. Like it was just like that, and it was a crazy time. And, thankfully, from a business standpoint, we were very like fortunate to keep a very close pulse on that, so that as we started to see the demand dry up, we pivoted the company, reduced workforce and things like that. From a personal standpoint, it was hard because a lot of people that had been here and joined during those years, as like contractors and things like that, ended up, putting on furloughs or things like that. So it was tough for me personally because, I that's just not fun. That's not something that anybody wants to do ever. And it's honestly interesting too, because there were times in my career prior to Create Ape where things like that happened to me. And I always used to look at, the owners or the C-suite team as like, kind of like these sharks, and being on the other end of it, I was like, okay, I'm sure some of them probably were, but sometimes things have to happen from a business standpoint because it's a business, it's not a charity, right? So it's just, it was interesting having to go through that. And I think the other part of that was, as we started to see that, in order for us to survive, we started to really take a step back and say, who do we want to be? Who are we as a company? Who is truly Create Ape? Where do we want to live? And some huge pivots were made. One of the biggest ones I could think of right off the bat was deciding to pull away from a development standpoint for large scale backend development, and just lean much harder into our true calling, which is UX design, UI design. It's strategy, it's product. That's what we love to do. It's what we're known for. It's where we have always had the highest of highs and very rarely had lows. Whereas, at the time we were taking a step back and looking, we saw, man, development is where there's a lot of risks. And we don't necessarily do it as great as we do UX. And so that was, I think, one big, huge takeaway that pivoted during that time.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, it's hard when you remove emotion from that. You kind of just like look at the facts of everything, which again is a very difficult thing to do. It kind of just made sense to focus on like the area that we're good at, and like actually taking the time to sit down, pull back, and say like, well, what are we doing really well?
Yep.
And trying to point towards that, and let that be your North Star. I think it was really important, for us to do, and I really think it's kind of carried us through, the last year or so.
Yeah, I agree, and it's, I think the other part of it too is, as we started to make that pivot into that, we leaned even harder into the UX side as well, and said, well, what are we really good at within? I mean, to say like I'm a UX designer, I'm a UI designer, that I think that there's part of that is somewhat generic, right? Like, so is that person.
It's very
like,
broad,
right? Like I'm not the best UX designer on the planet, right? Like there are others that are really good at this. So then it made us kind of question like, well, what does that mean for us? And I think that's where we started to, that's what started to trigger the shift to focus on medical and med tech, because we started to see what were our biggest projects, the most challenging projects, the projects that we felt the best about. And I don't mean best about like, this was successful and lucrative. I mean the best about that when you went to sleep at night, you're like, that was cool. I'm glad I was working on something like this.
Something impactful.
Impactful, something that's going to change lives in a positive way. And I think that's where we started to make that's where I think the echoes of what we have done in the last 6 months really started to, the seeds were set then, because that's where we sat down and we said, wow, like medical is kind of our lodestone. Like we are really good at this and the team feels good about it. And, we're like, it's almost reminds me of like Neo in the Matrix, where he finally realizes like he's the one and he's just kind of like blocking while looking around. Like, I feel like that's how we are when it comes to medtech and being able to apply the skills that we have spent decades learning to that. And I also think that it's a field that is very ripe to have those skills applied to it, to see such a huge positive impact for patients and the users that interact with those brands.
Yeah, man, I really feel like, initially niching down into design really kind of put the hunger in us, the drive to figure out well, what really is our niche, right? Like, because like niching down and saying like, oh, we do design, like kind of feels like a cop out in some ways. But man, trying to figure out like, well, what is the niche, or how far down do you niche? Like that, I think, is probably one of the hardest decisions. Like we've had to make. Like it's really really complicated. I feel like we're always second guessing ourselves. Like, well, is that the right choice? And I think once we decided, like, oh, you know what, healthcare, med tech, like that is the area that makes the most sense. And again, try to remove emotion from this like attachment of like, well, but we've been this for so long, and look at, okay, but what are we doing well?
Yeah.
To your point, and like that was always the answer, right? Like, that was always the answer. So it kind of just made sense to start to say like, well, hey, look, like that's who we are. Like that's what we're going to focus on, because we know we can drive really good results when it comes to UX design in the medical space. Hence the title of the podcast, UXRx,
Yeah.
which I love.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been a very interesting journey. But I mean, like, what is that, I guess, like to you in terms of like, hey, you're the agency owner. You've been here from the very beginning. Like, could you have ever seen like that being the case, where, hey, instead of just being like this design agency, like we're just going to solve this one problem?
Yeah. I mean, I think that if someone had told me, 8 years ago, hey, Create Ape is going to become an agency that is focused on med tech and medical, I probably would have been like, really? I mean, no, I don't think so. Like, I think that the reason that part of this was my own personal genesis in a way was, some of the projects that we were involved in really impacted me personally. So for example, I remember in 2021, I think 2020, we were working with a company called MediKeeper, and we were working with them on a COVID app. And that COVID app was to help patients track their exposures and, what to do if they were exposed and things like that. And we ended up doing one for the state of Hawaii and one for the state of New York. And that app, that prototype that we put together, their devs then worked on, and it got in front of, Vice President Pence during the first Trump administration. And like, when I heard that, I was like, whoa, wait a second. Like, I've done stuff in my career like that has been very broad. I mean, I worked on Farmville at one point, the paywall, things like that, which I'm sorry for.
So you're to blame. Okay.
Yeah, that farm cash, that was me. But like, that wasn't something that made me feel good necessarily. I was proud of like, wow, this is a big brand. And, I've worked with American Express and all the, like, that's fine. But this was the first time that I worked on something at that scale that I was like, wow, we are changing people's lives in a positive way. And like, you start to become hungry for that. You're like, well, let's do that again. That felt really good. And so I think that, again, COVID was a genesis, because, we started doing that. We were able to leverage that when we were working with, Athena and TiraPatient to do that app for the World Cup, the FIBA World Cup, that we helped them put together. So like, you start to extrapolate that to some of the other things we've done with like Apria or Supercare Health for people with, lung issues and things like that. It became this thing where it's like, man, this is really helping people in a positive way. But then, and I don't know why this is the case, but like, oftentimes these companies, their interfaces are fairly outdated. And so they're desperately needing this. And when we say they need it, what are we really talking about? Their users, the patients need it, right? Because if you're going through a hard time, what do you not want to do, right? You don't want to like sit there and be like, I need to contact a real person because I can't use this thing that you've created, right? Like, so yeah, I mean, it's just, I think that for me, seeing that change has been not only surprising, but also very rewarding.
Yeah. I have a similar experience actually, when at a previous agency I was working with, I ended up working on, it was an application for the VA, and it was for like mental health, and it was interesting. I didn't think much of the project until like one day the client walks in the office. He's like, okay, so we just showed it to like the president of the US, and like got it in front of all of these like politicians, and I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah.
That's cool. So I thought that was a very interesting thing back in the day. But yeah, man, I mean, it's healthcare is interesting because, I think a lot of times when I hear it, I always think it's just like it's one very specific thing. It's like, okay, that's all you do. But it's so broad, right? Like the things that you work on is so broad, from animations to product design, not just like digital applications, but like actually working on physical software, well, not physical software on physical devices. And like that I think is something that I don't see that often, in other spaces, like startups around just like AI and things like that. It's all digital, it's all in the cloud, and it's fun to do. But there's also something very interesting about working on a device or working on something that you can actually hold in your hand,
Yeah.
that I find very fun.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I think another thing that's really pertinent to this discussion, especially, is it's the right time for this. Healthcare is going digital very fast. We're at a point where, I think that UX design has to bridge the gap between traditional healthcare and having more of like a modern digital experience, for both patients, providers, industry adjacent. And if you think about it, poor UX, what does that do? I mean, yes, it leads to frustration and inefficiency, but what does that potentially also do? It could lead to medical errors, for example. And what does that mean exactly? Like, I remember in my career, there's one time I was at TrueCar. It was late. We were staying late because we were working on this big launch for one of the auto buying programs. And I remember one of my colleagues I was working with, this dude named Anthony. I remember he leaned back and he was like, "Oh man, it's not going to do anything unless it gets built. Like, we're not curing cancer. Like, let's just build this thing, right?" And that stuck with me. And in some of the projects we've done, the idea of, well, we're not curing cancer. It's like, well, wait a second. We may not necessarily be curing cancer in what we're doing, but we are helping people, or we are helping companies that are actually going to cure cancer or are trying to cure cancer. You know what I mean? And when you can feel that about what you're doing, not only does it make you feel great, but it also gives you this kind of like sense of almost urgency, where it's like, look, we got to do this. We got to get out there. We got to help these companies to modernize their experiences so that they can continue to provide better care to their patients. And I remember joking with you a little bit ago, like about like, I don't think anybody raises their hand in the United States, goes, man, the healthcare in America is just amazing. Like, no,
Yeah.
right? Like,
No.
hey, how much do I pay for health insurance? And we feel like, man, this kind of sucks, So I think the more that we can do this, the more that we're able to be part of the solution.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that. Like in the sense of like it is a very serious topic, so it kind of lights a fire under you to really get out there and get it done. But it's also something I think so many people have like a personal connection to. Like it's not like, oh well, like there's just this small subset of people that utilize this application. It's like, no, everybody has some experience with healthcare, with the healthcare system, with sicknesses, illnesses, whatever. And so like just being able to kind of like jump in at different areas along the way, and kind of trying to make their lives better, I think it's great. I mean, if I knew somebody who's out there trying to make my life better when it came to healthcare, I'd be like, oh, that's awesome. Like I always love trying to do some like user studies. I'm with companies I use products from personally, and it's always fun when I get to get involved in the opposite end of what we do here. So I'm actually the one being interviewed from time to time. I'm like, this is fun. I like it. By the way, you should probably do this and this next time. But
Right.
just saying.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting too. Like you mentioned it, like without going into much detail and dropping any names, like it's always wild when you use a pharmaceutical or a medical device and you're talking to the company that's talking to you about improving it from a UX perspective. And you're like, whoa, like, well, I guess I could be a persona because I'm using your drug or whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah.
So that has been pretty wild, especially in the last 2 years as we've been making this pivot,
Yeah. Well, I mean, so we've talked a little bit about, the pivot that we've actually made to healthcare, but, for those listening, like why would Create Ape be the right choice, for helping a med tech, health technology company out?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think there's a couple reasons. I think number one, when you think about the personas that are involved from a general sense in medical, in healthcare and med tech, they're very different, right? And I'm not just talking about like, doctors, nurses, which in themselves are different, but really when you start to think about patients, there is such a vast gulf of differences between their different needs. If you're creating an application that is meant to help people source their prescriptions faster, then the interaction for a geriatric patient versus a younger patient is huge from an interface standpoint. For example, larger font and typography, right, versus not, larger button inputs versus not. If you're taking into account accessibility or disabilities, right, that you still need to provide an experience for, what does that mean exactly from an ADA standpoint, right? Or being able to protect patients' privacy from a HIPAA standpoint. Like these are all critical factors that you'd be surprised how many times general service providers don't take into account. They just don't. Or if they do, they're paying lip service to it as opposed to saying, no, client, slow down. I know you want to get to this shiny thing, but we need to do this the right way, not only to protect you, but also to protect and help the patients that you're trying to impact a positive change to, Yeah. So I think that because we have so much experience, and I'll be the first to raise my hand and say that experience happened almost by accident at first. I don't know why, from like 2017 to now, we just started getting more and more medical clients. But, when we looked at everything and the dust settled at the beginning of 2024, we're like, we are really good at this. Like, we know this stuff really, really well. We should lean further into it. So I think that's one of the biggest reasons I can think of right off the bat. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think a lot of the issues just kind of piggybacking off of your point there, right? Like beyond just not doing ADA compliance and thinking about HIPAA compliance, there's a lot of people I talk to, they don't even really know it's a thing. It really just becomes like an afterthought. And, I think, we've been doing this long enough that, hey, we understand this is important. This needs to be a part of not just like development, right? Like, yeah, you're going to have to take into account in development, but you need to be thinking about it in design. You need to be thinking about it in strategy because the reality is when you are trying to be compliant with all of these different things, it does end up adding, a lot of time overall to like a project plan. And so like those are things that we need to be talking about up front, prioritizing and making sure that, we are as compliant as we can be in every area. So.
I think the other thing too, now that you're talking about this, is that, I think that a lot of medical companies and industry adjacent, companies that are involved in medtech, I think they're starting to wake up to the business impact of UX, right? Like historically healthcare, it was designed for like functionality first, usability second. And by the way, if you go look at a lot of these interfaces, it shows. I mean, it shows, right?
It feels like it, yeah.
But now I think companies are starting to realize that like better UX, it leads to better adoption. It leads to fewer errors. It leads to improved patient outcomes. I mean, like these are things that like, it's a win-win. And, I also think though that there's something else happening in 2025 nowadays, and that is that patients and providers, I think that they're starting to expect the same experiences in healthcare digitally that they're getting from other apps like Apple Health or Amazon or Uber. So the bar is being set higher, and I don't think that healthcare can just get away with like, you know, I don't even say any names, but like certain interactions that I just literally had to go through today because I was taking my son to have a double ear infection checked out. The amount of times I had to go and retrieve my password, re-authenticate myself, log back in, find out that even as his dad, I don't have access to his record. So I have to find 3 different steps to go through to get access to his record so that I can tell the doctor, who by the way should have access to his records, I would imagine, to verify it. Like that, I just lived and breathed it today, right? Like, so, I mean, and my son has a double ear infection. He doesn't have brain cancer, but I know that there are parents out there that have to deal with that horrific situation. And the last thing they need is crappy UX making their hard lives even harder. And I hate to put it out there like that because it sounds very like, whoa, well, hey, I'm not wrong. I mean, it's the truth. And I think that's one of those things where why it feels so right for us to lean hard into this.
No, it is, and that resonates with me. My daughter's actually sick right now as well. So like jumping all of the same hoops of like, wait, what's the name of that thing? What's the weird URL they're using? Okay, let me log in. No, okay. It's not under my account. Let me try. Okay, she has her own account. It's connected to mine, and I can't message her from. Like it's so confused. It's so frustrating. Things just to like, I just want to schedule an appointment, or like I just want to call you on the phone. Like a lot of people using medical devices are using it in, I would say high pressure situations or just really serious situations, and so like it needs to work, but it needs to work for them as well. So
agreed.
Yeah. I was actually really surprised when I first started working here how many medical companies you guys had. I've worked with a lot in the past, but I didn't expect it. The brand was kind of edgy. It was fun. It had that pop of green going on. So I expected more like SaaS, startups and things like that. But it was welcome. It felt familiar in a lot of ways. So I liked that.
I think at the end of the day, when it comes to healthcare and when it comes to medtech, and if nobody gets anything else out of this, hopefully they get this sentence: good UX is no longer an option. It's not an option anymore. It's a requirement for many reasons, like we've already stated. And so we want to be the ones to help bring that. Like, we want to be the ones that are positioned to help our clients have good UX, to see that positive impact trickle down to their patients and providers. And I think that that's our future. I think another big part of it too is the rise of AI and where it makes sense versus where it doesn't. Because so often, AI is changing so quickly, every couple of weeks in various ways, in various industries. It's impacting everything. I've been on other podcasts and interviews, and I'm on record saying that I think that AI is going to affect humanity more than anything ever before. Whether it's the wheel or the printing press, like nothing will affect us as much as AI will. And it's going to be an amazing and volatile time. And I think that because Create Ape is so AI centric from a technological standpoint, and seeing where the technology makes sense, where it doesn't make sense, and then staying on top of that on a weekly basis, so that when things change quickly, and they do, we're able to go to our clients and say, hey, this actually would make a ton of sense here. So I think, when you say like, where do we go from here? I think another is to continue to double down in AI from a UX perspective when it comes to where it does make sense. Like, for example, in synthesizing user testing data and staying away from where it absolutely 100% does not make sense, like using AI generated images, on a patient portal, for example. Like, don't do that. That's bad. And then, continuing to make sure that, we're looking at the bottom line also for our clients, because let's not kid ourselves, right? Like, if it doesn't exist yet, but if there is a tool that will allow you to, and if we're redoing a patient portal that has, 50 core pages and 200 variational pages that are templatized, and there is an AI tool that can help with that, then yes, we should use it. Why? Because it brings down the cost for our clients. It lowers the overall investment that they have to make. And that's something that will eventually be carried, ideally back over to the user. Either way, they're still going to get advantage of having a better UX experience. So I think AI, is going to be another big part of where I think we lean into.
Yeah.
I probably have a couple others, but I'll let you maybe speak to it too, man.
I mean, I think AI is a very interesting topic, right? Like it's an important part of, I think, our process overall. You know, like we're pretty, I guess I would say AI agnostic. Like it doesn't really matter what it is. Like we're in such an early like experimental stage with everything, trying to figure out like, well, what is the right tool and how is the right way to use it in our own process. But I think AI, like when it comes to products, I feel like it's becoming more and more of an expectation now that if I'm using an application, like there should be AI in it in some way, shape, or form. I mean, when you see Microsoft and Apple building AI into their products, and Apple's been doing this for a really long time, they just don't call it AI. And then look at things like, I don't know, Snapchat, Instagram, like these are just social media tools, but AI is being built into it
Yeah.
to help you, I don't know, have conversations and to prompt you with things. Like it's something, I think when I see the medical space using, I find it very interesting. Like whether it's looking at scans and, trying to detect things that maybe the human eye couldn't catch or, wouldn't catch as quickly. Or if it's just like, hey, like we have this product for people in the field that do this thing, but we're using AI to help make their jobs easier in some way by, providing recommendations on how to optimize something, or, trying to use context from what they were just doing to fill or pre-fill like the next set of steps. So they're maybe just reading on their phone or tablet versus sitting there trying to type things out.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting to see how that all kind of comes together.
I agree. I mean, if someone said to me, hey, like, what's one way that you've seen already it being applied to with clients that you guys have in a way that's been positive? I would say probably the easiest and quickest is customer support and help, right? Like instead of me having to go through massive like pages of like, okay, let me use search. Okay, I think this is what I'm looking for. Being able to just talk to an AI bot that is not going to just give you regurgitated canned answers, but you can literally talk to them. Be like, no, seriously, just talk to me. I'm here. Like, what are you looking for? And being able to not only give back to the user what they're looking for, but be empathetic when they do it, right? Like, I'm sorry you're going through that. That sounds really difficult. Here's something that I think would help. If you can't find what you're looking for here are the contact numbers. How many times have you contacted, I hate to call them out on this, but like, Spectrum. Like there's a bajillion Spectrum numbers, right? And I'm just like, I just want the number to talk to a human being so I can figure out why my bill is twice what it was last month.
Yeah.
No, but I have to go through like all these pages and a chatbot opens up. I'm like, okay, I think this is it. It shouldn't be that difficult, right? So yeah, man, I mean, I think that those are definitely areas. I think, another question, that I've been asked as we made this pivot is, the ideal med tech clients that you're looking for. I've really thought about that a lot, and I'd almost love to hear your answer before I answer first, just because, so often I think, you're, as the head of the UX department and operations, you're really on the front lines a lot of times. So I don't want to color your thoughts on this first. I'd love to hear what you say. And for those of you listening, the reason I'm saying this is because Zach and I have this kind of ongoing joke where probably 9.9 times out of 10, we are thinking the same thing, which probably works so well together. So I want to just see if we are, but why don't you take a stab at it first?
You want me to name names or just kind of talk in general terms here?
Your call. Would I name names? I mean, it's funny, like, I don't want to name names on one hand, but on the other hand, like, there is a certain healthcare provider that my family uses that I'm driving me crazy, and I'd almost do it for free at this point if they would just come to me and be like, let me fix this experience,
Yeah.
I'd say it's up to you, man. It's up to you.
I mean, yeah, as far as like the kinds of things I would want to, work on, a lot of it is digital product. Like I come from a product design background, so I thoroughly enjoy that. I enjoy the depth of it. But in terms of maybe like what these things are doing, I would love to work with a company that has like a CGM company. There's definitely some things I could pick on there. So it's a continuous glucose monitoring. So if you have like diabetes or something,
Yeah.
um, I find those products generally being really frustrating for me at the very least. Uh, but outside of that, insurance companies, man, you guys need some help with. I was saying this with love, but like you need some help with the information architecture there. It's so hard to find the things that you need. Like just trying to, what does my policy cover?
Yeah.
What's the copay? Is it this month or last year? I don't know.
Yeah.
But things like that, I think is where I would want to focus. I would probably throw in, companies that are, really using AI in their own product. Because I think that's a very fun thing. And just like as somebody who's very forward thinking, I guess, when it comes to technology, like I'm always one of the first people trying things out.
Yeah.
I like that they're using AI. Kind of pushes me to think about like, well, how else could AI help you beyond just like the way I look at it, which is like help me with writing, help me with editing, help me with I would say design, but I don't think it does too well, unfortunately. But maybe when it comes to synthesizing things, like that's really where I see
Yeah.
AI helping me the most. So, what about you? What are some companies you would want to focus on?
I mean, so personally, um, I have a I'm a dad. I have three boys, ages like 9 till 16. And I have a soft spot for anything that's helping kids. So
Mm,
any med tech company, any medical company that touches that, I'd voraciously want to work on something like that. So that, and by extension, anything that helps parents too, you know?
yeah.
So that's probably one. I mean, in terms of like, you know, size and scale, I really don't, I'm agnostic for the most part. Like we've worked with startup medical companies that we've done amazing work with. We've also worked with Fortune 100 companies. I think that if someone put a gun to my head and said, hey, you have to pick one, I'd probably pick the smaller companies just because I feel like I'm able to impact that more positively quicker. Whereas larger companies sometimes have a lot more red tape and things like that to go through in order to
Mhm.
provide a positive impact. But, I mean, like I think about some of the work like we're doing with NACCD through the CDC and stuff like that. Like it's like those are big organizations and we're doing amazing work with them. The stuff that you mentioned that we did with the VA, like that's
Mhm.
amazing work that we're doing there. And so for me, it's really not so much about the size or even necessarily the funding or things like that. It's more about, if it was completely up to me, like I said, I have a soft spot in my heart for, anything that's going to help kids or parents. And then the other would be just, working with companies where the impact, that we can make a really positive impact, ideally quickly. And I guess I'll close on just saying that, like, sometimes you work on projects where there's a very clear MVP. And
Mhm.
I love that because those types of projects, we can get something out to market really quickly. We can be very agile about it and, let users tell us what V1 really needs to be. So yeah, that's kind of my initial thought on that.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think a lot of the like startup companies, they're they're a little more fun to work with, or maybe I should say they're a little more unique to work with. Like they seem to try and solve much more of like a specific problem versus like some of these really large companies, where like their foot is in everything, right? Their hand is in everything. So it's nice to kind of have a more unique focus, which I do agree with. So awesome. Well, any looking back, I guess, over the last couple of years, any final thoughts, any big lessons before we close this thing out?
I mean, I think one lesson that I've learned is if your spidey senses are up, listen to them, you know?
Yeah.
And like I mean, they were definitely like you had, like, we're walking around here for months going, man, there's something here. What is it exactly? And I'm glad that we lean into it because, there are times where we're approached by clients that are not in medical and it could be technically lucrative. But for one reason or the other, we're just like, you know what? Like, yes, we could make money off of this, but how, like, I'll say this, there's this pastor I like, and I heard him say one time, if you if you are occupied on what is good or good enough, you're going to miss out on what's amazing, right? So if we're tied up in projects that aren't leaning into this pivot that we're doing, we're going to miss the boat on the ones that we want, on the diabetes that you're talking about, or the one that's going to help kids with cancer. And so I think that's it. It's really just keeping our eye out, getting the word out there. I think we've never been good at promoting ourselves. We always kind of let word of mouth do what it needs to do, and it's worked out fairly well. But I think that because the iron is hot, because AI is so prevalent, because we have so much momentum, I think it's just getting the word out there to the decision makers at these companies, saying, hey, we're here. If you have something, consider us, because we can do a really good job, and you'll find that we're really, really good partners.
Awesome. Well, this was fun, man. Looking forward to doing the next one soon.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right.